Welcome home. We are WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and BaltimorePositive.com. Go find us on the internet, wherever you do it. Ravens fans, this is a purple segment about to come your way. All of it brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. I will very soon have Raven scratch-offs. I'm sure the Gold Rush Sevens doublers are here for the here and now. At least they said in August it's coming. August is like soon. We're going to have these when we get this thing back out. We were going to be at State Fair on the 13th of August. We've had a complication. It's pushed some things. Angela Alsterbrooks is going to push us into September. We're going to make that happen during the Oyster Tour. All of it brought to you by the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions. I got to get some Liberty Pure water out, but this is Liberty Pure water here because they keep my water crystal clear. Well water, any kinds of plumbing issues, that's what they do at Liberty Pure Solutions. And they've really they've upgraded my gig with my water. That's why my skin's so nice, because I got good water. Also, Jiffy Lube Multi-Care. That's why my car runs so well. That's why Luke gets out to Ravens camp and then down to Camden Yards, and the Camden Yards and Ravens camp. And I get to sit and watch him run around and laugh about how I muck things up with the Ravens and the Orioles, and I'm not allowed to go anymore. But I am a little jelly with the Padres, because I'm a Padres guy, and Machado coming back, and they're giving away stuff and no hitters. But then you're like, hey, dude, they're putting on pads. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. It's my mother's birthday. It's July. Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. How are you? How you holding up? I mean, the homestand's about to happen here. We've talked a lot of baseball around here. Trading deadline. My, oh my, it's very, very busy. My mother's, as we record this on Friday, my mother's birthday today, and she would be, let's see, 19, 20, 105 today, and she would love herself a first-place Oriole team that's scuffling in a trade deadline, and football, and a Luke Jones report of Lamar not really being under the influenza, as my mom would say, or my mom would say, he had the virus. She would say he had the virus. This is before COVID. She didn't live long enough for COVID. God bless her. But she'd say he had the virus. That's if your nose was running, you had the virus. So he's back out on the field. All the mysteries are solved. And hey, purple training camp. How about that, Luke Jones?
Yeah, and with Lamar Jackson being back, albeit limited when he returned to the field on Wednesday, but just in time for the pads to come on for everyone else. And this is what I like to call another one of those off-season checkpoints. And look, let's be clear, we're still 2 weeks out from the first preseason game, where most of the starters aren't going to play anyway. So
it's July. It's July.
Yeah, so we're still very, very, very early in this process. But this is one of those checkpoints where I say, look, I was out there for OTAs, and I was out there for mandatory minicamp, and I was out there this past week in Owings Mills. And this is where I say, none of that stuff that happened really mattered. It didn't. Practice observations in May and June and the first week of training camp, they're fun. It's a football fix for anyone who's ready for football, for anyone who wanted to take a respite from the Orioles, or anyone who's not a baseball person. So it's fun. I'm not anti observations for camp. I mean, heck, I'm out there every day. Of course I'm going to tell you what I see. But I also remind everyone that nothing to this point has been all that meaningful, really meaningful whatsoever, beyond health, which they've navigated the first few days, other than Lamar's illness, without any major injuries. In fact, no one's really even left the field, quite frankly, over the first 4 days of practice. So John Harbaugh would say, hey, we're ramping up slowly. We're trying to ease guys back into football. But now the pads come on. Now the practicing, to me, becomes a little more real in terms of the threat of contact being introduced, as Cam Cameron years and years ago famously talked about. I think he was talking about, I can't remember if it was Tandon Doss or one of the young Ravens wide receivers. And Cam Cameron's comment was, let's see what happens when the threat of contact is introduced. And I think that was always an appropriate way of summing up OTAs, mandatory minicamp, and those first few days of training camp. Now the pads come on. Now it becomes not real football 100%, because very, very little tackling to the ground. It's not as though these guys are going to be doing Oklahoma drills like yesteryear with two-a-days and things of that nature. But business does start to pick up. Offensive line competition starts to pick up when the pads are on and when you're going full contact. So it's not exciting in the sense of thinking about it in terms of a game, but I think the observations and what you start to see does start to become a little more meaningful, and it's kind of the next step. So it's also, as I just alluded to, they've stayed healthy to this point. When you do introduce contact, that's where the injury risk does go up. So they're still going to be smart about it. They're not going to go full live for 2 hours. I mean, they pick their spots when they hit and when they go full contact. And even when they do live, they generally just do live, but once the ball carrier's wrapped up, they blow the whistle. They generally don't go live all the way to the ground, because those pile ups tend to be those times where guys get hurt. But there's always some excitement. And I think for the younger guys, this is very much a litmus test. I could, if you gave me the exercise of going through my last 15 years of off-season practice coverage, I could probably name you a team of guys that looked really good in shorts in May and June and then disappear, or guys that look good the first week of camp and then disappear once the games start. It's just how this works. So,
all these guys are fit and fast and look good getting off the bus.
Yeah, sure.
Even the offensive and defensive linemen look good getting off the bus. God rest Saragusa's soul, but like, he never looked at that part. There's some guys that are even GQ from the defensive tackle standpoint.
Yeah. But once you introduce contact, once you put the pads on, it becomes a little more like real football. And that's where, you guys start to, and there might be some guys that I haven't uttered once at BaltimorePositive.com or on our airwaves that will make a big play on one of these first days where they hit. And I'll say, wow, where did that come from? So there's also some guys where that happens on occasion. So we'll see how it plays out. But
then John Harbaugh notes that in the postgame, usually the postgame report. But I do find it funny. I mean, I'll give a shout out to Bo Smolka, because I saw his tweet out there or something, and it was something like, it was a headline that had something to do with like the urgency of a July practice where the defense won or the offense won or somebody's ahead of this or that or who won the day. And I'm like, oh God, spare me this. And I remember the last time I was on the field as a professional, this is after Chad Steele threw me out and told me I wasn't coming to his training camp. I was up in Latrobe with all the Steelers beat writers on like day 8 or day 10. They were in Latrobe. They hadn't played yet. And it was like muddy. It was awful. And they were sloppy, and they didn't have a quarterback because they had 3 of them, and they were all trying to figure out if Kenny Pickett was the answer. And they were counting his interceptions in 7-on-7 in shorts. And they're all counting, and they're putting it out on Twitter, and I'm watching it. And I'm like, tell Chad Steele that's why I don't attend these, because I can't take any of this seriously. But I know it's important for them and for evaluation, but for how it's reported upon for the next couple of weeks, dude, it's a little too Fox News for my WNST. It's a little too sensational for me. It's a little too rash from a practice standpoint of reporting just to report. I don't know. I don't want to call it clickbait, but I would call it attention bait.
I'm going to push back a little bit on that because I'm out there. I'm not going to just go out there and not talk about it. I'm not going to go out there and just not write about it. I'm getting paid to go cover it. And while you would say that, and while there are certainly plenty of fans who don't care about training camp, there are a lot who do. So that's where I will report what happens. I will note that on Wednesday, Ravens quarterbacks threw 6 interceptions. Now Lamar threw 1. Lamar didn't practice all that long on Wednesday. Josh Johnson threw 3. Do I think that means anything in the big picture? No, of course not. But for your football fix, for your practice observation on July, 24th, there you go.
I got in the middle of Steelers beat writers arguing whether the interceptions were real and which ones to report upon and which ones didn't. That's when it got to be comical on a cloudy day when the sky was about to open up. In July, I just found it to be hilarious because all the Steelers Nation, there's fans in Japan. I don't like them either, who are Steelers fans. And they're hanging on this over Kenny Pickett's first 3 days of practice in Latrobe.
Sure.
And I just find that to be I like that Lamar's signing autographs and everybody's wearing number 8 and the governor's there and you're like, well, like I like all of that and I like practice and I think practice, unlike Allen Iverson, I think this stuff's really important because I'm the first guy that gets pissy when they don't show up to do this stuff, right? But all
Sure.
that being said, how it looks right now and who looks good in July, I'm not as interested from the reportorial standpoint of that
Sure.
as I am the functional standpoint of what they think of it. Not what I think of it. They're the ones in the classrooms. You're only seeing some sort of an outcome, but I find it to be too judgmental for guys that are practicing. That's me. That's how
fair.
I feel about it as a journalist and as a, hey, the doors are closed. We're not reporting how many free throws Larry Bird missed today in practice. And you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I think that's a rougher part of it being open that for players agents you guys can make a name for themselves, right? Like literally cornerback picks off a couple of Lamar's passes and all of a sudden the secondary is doing great this week, right?
Right. Well, the secondary has looked really good just because it's been
Thank you, Bo
overwhelming.
Smoke. I saw Bo. That was what I was giving
Overwhelming.
Bo a hard time about.
That said, it's late July, and this is where I think we have to strike the right balance as reporters, and this is why you will rarely ever see me sit there and start citing statistics for practice. Like I'll see some, not so much the Ravens beat, but I look around the league and you'll see stats being kept during practice. That's where I'm like, guys, what are we doing here? For one, we know that many of these periods in practice have a very specific objective. It's not like you're just scrimmaging, trying to beat the opposition. Yeah, you're trying to you're trying to upstage your opponent on that specific play. But is it red zone? Is it a specific play action period where you're really focusing on that, where the defense might know that you're running play action, right? I mean, it's so there's just so much of that. So I think what it really needs to be is we need to understand context and nuance when we're talking about reporting, talking as reporters, and also as fans who are interested in it, understanding what it really means. I love practice observations on a daily basis that I just keep track of because there are times then, Nestor, where there'll be an undrafted rookie that will make the 53-man roster. And I'll do a search at BaltimorePositive.com and I'll find how many times I mentioned that guy. And hey, I mentioned him on July 28th that he made a heck of a play on the football, or hey, he blew past Ronnie Stanley as a pass rusher, or whatever it is. But you have to understand the context. And I always kind of view it through the lens. And that's why I said putting on the pads is a checkpoint for me, where everything that's happened to this point in OTAs, mini camp, and the first 4 days of training camp, I basically forget. I mean, I really do, because now it's like, okay, now they're starting to play something that's a little more like real football. But we just all have to understand that as media and as fans consuming it. It's fine. It's good to have that coverage. It's way better than if the Ravens just closed practice and we're just twiddling our thumbs for the next 6 weeks saying, oh, what's going to happen?
Yeah,
because
to your point, they do plenty of that.
Yeah, and you don't.
Season. Yeah.
And you know that, right? And you know that the team's
That's why
not
you
exactly.
love it. You love it because you get to see a whole lot more of it now formationally. Sure. That paints the picture for. I get
sure.
That. And no one appreciates you more than me. Maybe our audience, but but there is a point in the reporting part of this
sure.
where they're out there practicing and an interception is reported when the breakdown could have been from 21 other players on the field trying to practice a play. Yeah. That's the weird part for me, because it is, especially this time of the year, and they video all of this every day. They're ripping it apart every night. Anybody who's watched Hard Knocks sort of knows all the ins and outs of how seriously the offensive line coaches and the assistant coaches and the guys that are breakdown tape are watching foot movement, arm movement, body movement, alignment, assignment, technique, all of those things in every one of these hot days, they're seeing who's tired, who's not, who's like they're evaluating every part of these players because that's what they do professionally. And this is when, to your point, you're evaluating them now. This is when they get to evaluate because they all look good getting off the bus. They all are in the classroom and you sort of know what their intellect is. And that's why you drafted them, because you think they can catch on. You think they can be a good student, because that's what this is about. From the day I met Marvin Lewis, they're teachers. These are students. Let's go out. This is the quiz. This is the test. The
No doubt.
quiz. The test is in September.
Sure. Well, and the test really gets later into the season. I mean, specifically for this football
So
team.
those are the finals.
Yeah, exactly. But just a couple things. And look, I mean, this every single day is just a little tiny piece of the big picture, right? This is why I've said this for years, and we've talked about this for years. When you see someone show up in a preseason game, and Shamar Bridges was an example of this. There was a wide receiver a couple years ago on the 90-man roster. He had a really nice preseason game. It was a good story. His what was it? His stepfather, I think, had played for the Ravens in a preseason setting 20 some years ago. Never made the team or anything like that. So it was a really fun story for that. I think it was a Saturday night preseason game. It was a story for a couple days. And then guess what? He never really did another thing after that. He was on the practice squad for a short time, never made it to the 53-man roster. So you just have to understand what everything is. And for me, if someone and John Harbaugh has even said this, so I'm not talking out of turn like I'm a know-it-all here. I've heard coaches talk about this, that when someone flashes in a preseason game, but that's the first time they've really flashed, and in the 3 weeks of practice leading up to that, they didn't do a darn thing. That's not going to get you that far, because they're going to say, why aren't you stacking and practicing well every single day? You can see pretty quickly, even as someone like me, and look, I'm not Eric DeCosta, I'm not John Harbaugh, I'm not one of their scouts, okay? Let's be very clear about that. But over the years, some of the rookie free agents who've ultimately made the team, you know what I can tell you? Boy, they really show up in practice, and you see that they're doing good things just about every day. And they're showing. Patrick Owasso was a great example of that. He was an undrafted linebacker. Had been I think he was a safety in college, off the top of my head.
I remember Will Dempsey being that guy in 1 year, and it just came from nowhere. Zach Orr was one of those guys.
Sure. Dude. But I can remember, and this is one example. There have been plenty of guys like this, but I remember Owasso. I don't think we had talked about him at all in the spring as reporters. I don't think we had talked about him the first couple days. I mean, they didn't have quite as long of a ramp-up period. I mean, this was 10 years ago. But I remember it was either the first day or it had to be one of the first couple days of the pads coming on. And it was Kyle Juszczyk caught a pass in the flat, and Owasso just lit him up. I mean, it was, man, where the heck did that come from? And then from that point on, he established himself. Now, if I recall correctly, I don't think he made the 53-man roster in week 1. I could be wrong on that. But he found his way to the 53-man roster sooner than later. And I still go back to that point. Everyone famously remembers Terrell Davis for the Broncos, right? That kickoff play where I think the Broncos were playing the 49ers. I think it was in Japan or something like that. It was one of those exhibition international games, if I recall correctly. But he sprinted down the field and absolutely crushed the kick returner. And that put him on the radar to make the team. And then, of course, a year later, he's becoming this best running back in football. So, you always have those stories. But generally speaking, for the young guys that are trying to make an impression, it's showing up day after day after day. Now, the other point I wanted to make beyond that, and it pertains to the quarterback, but it's the easiest example because it's something that's measurable. But I would venture to say, if Lamar Jackson goes through the rest of training camp and doesn't throw a single interception, I'm not sure that's a good thing. And the reason why I would say that is not because you want Lamar just to go out there and just aimlessly throw the ball to the opposing, to the defense, but this is the time where you're trying things out. Drew Brees talked about this for years. Tom Brady talked about this for years. This is the time of year where you see if you can fit the ball into that window, that coverage window, and you see what your potential number 4 wide receiver can do on a jump ball or a 50-50 proposition.
And you also show the wide receiver you'll throw it to him.
Yeah, exactly. So and let's be clear, there's a balance there. If Lamar's throwing 8 interceptions every practice, then yeah, you're starting to ask questions. But this is also when guys are trying things out, and this is why you don't want to just look at this through the lens of, well, Lamar Jackson was 17 of 22 during 11 on 11 reps, and he threw 3 touchdowns, but he also had 2 interceptions. It's like, okay, that sounds great in terms of what you would see on TV on Sundays, but that doesn't tell me a whole lot about what they actually worked on that day. And
pitchers in spring training are famous for this, right?
Sure, exactly. Pitchers, yeah. So again, that doesn't mean we don't report on it. It doesn't mean fans can't hear details, but we all need to understand context and nuance to how this works. It's not a real game. even when they put the pads on this, over the weekend and we get into more of these live contact practices, and even when they get into the preseason games, I mean, it's still not the same as lining up against the Chiefs on September 5th, let alone talking about what's going to happen in December and January. So we just all need to understand that. And if we do, then practice observations are fun. Hey, it gives you a football fix, because we know that they're not playing a real game for another just under, close to 6 weeks. We know they're not playing their first preseason game for about 2 weeks. And even then, you're not going to see many of the starters. So there's nothing wrong with this. Just understand what it is. And if we understand what it is, then I'm happy to share my 12 Ravens thoughts on a daily basis. But you know what I say about those 12 Ravens thoughts every day, Nestor? I forget about them the next day after I write them and after people read
24-hour rule. 24-hour rule.
Didn't mean all that. Yeah, I mean, it really is. So again, it's fun. And, at this point in time, the only thing that's consequential, health, and just understanding the general big picture that, yeah, they're preparing for the season. And that's, again, where you go into, because Lamar Jackson threw an interception on a specific play, that doesn't mean he made a horrendous play. It might be it's an information gathering opportunity where you say, all right, I can't throw the ball there because Kyle Hamilton just picked it off, or, oh, maybe I need to throw back shoulder there, and that's an opportunity to make a big play. And Tez Walker, their 4th-round rookie pick, it just showed that he can make a play on a ball like that. So, you have different things like that where you're learning. It's evaluation, right? It's evaluation for the coaches and for the players. So Buck Showalter used to always say this about his third base coach every year. He'd say, if my third base coach goes through the full season and doesn't get a single guy thrown out at the plate, he had a bad year, because there are a lot of missed opportunities there if he's playing it that safe. That's why I said, if Lamar Jackson goes through a whole training camp without throwing in any interceptions, then I kind of wonder if he's trying to, or not trying, I wonder if he's maximizing everything he can do on the football field, because it's like an artist, it's like an artist with a canvas there. You got a chance to explore and see what you can do there. So take advantage. And if you throw a pick, who cares? Even if the media's out there, who cares? Again, it's, don't throw 8 picks a game or a day. Then I'll start to ask questions if you're throwing that many every day. But you throw a stray pick here or there because you're trying something out, this is the time to do it. Not against the Chiefs, not against Buffalo, not against Cincinnati later in the season.
Certainly not against Philadelphia or Atlanta next month in some preseason game, because that's not happening either.
Right.
This is the only practice these guys are going to get as a real team.
Yeah, I mean, the only other opportunity that most of the starters are going to get, we assume, I mean, John Harbaugh hasn't said this officially, but I'm guessing it's not going to change. I mean, if you didn't play your starters last year and you led the AFC and you had the best regular season of any team in the NFL, chances are you're probably not changing too much on that front. But when they have their joint practice with the Packers, that'll be the most meaningful on-field work that the starters are going to get this summer, most likely, because that's a chance to have a little bit of a controlled scrimmage. You're probably not doing a ton of live to the ground, but you'll certainly go live, and you'll have a chance to see what it looks like. And that'll be as close as Lamar and the established veterans most likely get, because I'm guessing we're not going to see them in the preseason games. I mean, the way they played last year, I don't see any reason why you would play them in the preseason, because they went 13-4 in the regular season. So, so it's all about understanding context. And now it is a little more interesting because they do put the pads on, and I think you do start to find out a little more about the young guys. You start to find out a little more about this offensive line, which is still very much wide open in terms of what it's going to look like, other than Linderbaum at center and Stanley at left tackle. And, for these young pass rushers like Owe and especially David Ajabo and Tavius Robinson, we're going to find out about those guys in terms of, are they ready to be part of the rotation? You know what you have with Van Noy. You know that Owe is at least a legit NFL outside linebacker. Whether he's going to be a star or not is certainly very much up in the air still. But you got to find out. Ajabo's got to stack days. He's got to develop. He's got to practice. Tavius Robinson's got to practice. Adisa Isaac, when he gets right with the hamstring, he's got to practice. So once the pads come on, it does become a little more real for those guys in terms of, okay, it's great to run around out in shorts, in May and June, but now it's time where football starts to look a little more real. And that's where it's more interesting to see how those guys are doing, more so than keeping track of what Lamar Jackson's completion percentage is during practice.
He is Baltimore, Luke. He is going to be out on the practice fields, no matter what the temperature or the conditions may be. Monitoring all things for Ravens fans. Follow him along with the Ravens flock at Baltimore Luke in all of the good social media spaces. We got baseball, Padres around, the Orioles hovering with this trading deadline. All of that stuff available out on social media all weekend long, as well as at BaltimorePositive.com.